Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening whenever you are watching this. Welcome back to After the Buzzer. I am your host, Couper Moorhead, and we are talking about the Miami Heat's loss to the New York Knicks and victory over the Washington Wizards on this two-game home back-to-back. It was a tough loss to the Knicks. Miami was obviously up 19 points. They were up double digits in the fourth quarter. Knicks surged back to win in overtime on the back of Jalen Brunson, who just kept driving. And then tonight, second game, Washington, bit of a shrug of a win, a professional win, but that shrug, I mean, in a good sort of sense of relief. It was nevertheless, it was whiplash if you watch both games. There was this intense playoff-style basketball on one side, and then over here you got a pretty quiet, stress-free-ish sort of a game against the team with the worst net rating in the league. There's a lot going on in 2 days. We will talk about both games in a second, but first let's get into the standings. We need to do a standings update because as much as I like to talk about these games from a sense of player development, where these guys are as far as the team, the rotation, strategy, scheme, what are things going to mean in a playoff series, well, we're in March now, and things matter as far as what the playoffs are actually going to look like, who they could play, the play-in tournament, all of these things. Here's where the Heat are right now. With tonight's win, the Heat are 4.5 games back of the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons are leading that series 2-1. There's one game to play. We won't get into tiebreakers now. That's for a little bit down the road. There's a whole web of tiebreakers that comes up once we get into all those. But point is, Pistons have a pretty decent cushion with about a month left to play. They are in number 6. The Heat are in number 7. You got to get to number 6 to get out of the play-in tournament. It's going to be tough. That game against the Pistons that's left on the schedule will be crucial. That can help you make up some ground. But if they lose those kind of games this time of year essentially count for 2 games in the standing because you can lose the tiebreaker that way. So we'll see how that goes. Heat are in 7. They're 1 game up on Orlando. That series is tied 2-2. That tiebreaker will be decided down the road. They're 1.5 games up on Atlanta in number 9. The Hawks are up 2-1 in that series with 1 to play. Again, tiebreaker up in the air. Now, Chicago's number 10. Chicago at 10, then there's Philly and Brooklyn at 11 and 12. The Heat are 5.5 up on Chicago. They're also 8 up, a full 8 games up on 10, 11, Brooklyn and Philly. Joel Embiid was just announced to be out for the season on Philadelphia's side. So what we're talking about here, there's been sort of a great narrowing in the Eastern Conference standings around the play-in. And most of these teams it's Miami, Orlando, Atlanta in particular that are kind of bunched up for the 7, 8, 9 seeds. And where the Heat are right now is they have a puncher's shot. If they beat Detroit soon, and Detroit will have to help them out with some losses, and the Heat can have to go on a bit of a run. But 4.5 games is not insurmountable. It's not necessarily likely because that's a significant amount of games, but it's possible. You just got to go on a run, string some wins together. Detroit's going to have to lose some. It's going to be really, really, really hard for the Heat to drop out of the play-in outright with where Brooklyn and Philadelphia are. It's going to be really hard for them to even get down to number 10 where Chicago is. So what we're really talking about right now is a shot to get out of the play-in, very difficult to drop out. And then right in the middle, there's going to be a lot of jostling for the 7, 8, 9. Remember, 7 will host 8 for the first play-in game. 9 will host 10, and then the winner of the 9-10 plays the loser of 7-8. So as long as you're in that 7-8, then you have 2 shots, 2 games to make sure you get into the playoffs. If you're in that 9-10, you got to win 2. We'll get there. We're going to keep updating you as the standings evolve. This is going to be one of the biggest stories of the next month. Let's talk about that Knicks game, which I'm sure was disappointing to a great many of you. The Heat were really in control for much of it. Offense fell, got a little stuck in the mud late. The Knicks surged, and that was it. That was overtime. Jalen Brunson, like we said. And the question I got most after that game was, and I've had after many of these recent losses, is that why has Miami had trouble holding leads late in games? And I want to talk about through a particular lens, and maybe this will provide some insight when a lot of it to me comes down to the offense. Because the defense, while I don't think the defense has necessarily been, top 5 elite level like the Heat, their standards usually are. Since they've added Davion Mitchell and Andrew Wiggins, Wiggins has missed the last couple games, and Mitchell didn't play tonight. Half the team didn't really play against Washington. The Heat still have a certain level baseline of defensive consistency. So the offense tends to be what we've seen has had fall-offs late in games and fourth quarters. Early in that next game, the first half, the Heat had 40 points in the paint, including 7 dunks. I thought it was going to be a little bit more than 7 because it felt like Ware and Bam were just dunking every time down the floor, lobs, transition, all kinds of stuff like that. And the season high, by the way, for dunks in the first half is 11. So the Heat were 4 off of the season high in the entire league. Offense looked great. The ball was pinging around. With quickness, there was no stalling, no stopping. Assists were flowing. It looked like it was coming easy, which is both a good thing because you want your offense to look like it's coming easy. That means you're getting really good, easy looks. But where the team has gotten into trouble lately is when the offense looks like things are tougher. And that usually happens when defenses tighten up. And that really, to me, was the story of that game. So 40 points in the paint in the first half, 14 in the second half. Jalen Brunson had 16 points in the paint in the second half alone. And the story that it was, for me is that, well, first of all, you hear the questions of when it's so easy like that, when you're getting all these dunks, when you're getting all these paint points, why don't you just keep doing that the whole game? Just keep, quote unquote, throwing it to the big guys for dunks. And it's just not that easy, right? The defense always has a say in it. You can't just say, keep throwing the ball to Khalil Ware because the Knicks don't want you to do that. They're going to make adjustments to stop you from doing what you've been doing successfully, right? So you take a look at the first half. All of Ware's dunks. New York keeps putting 2 on the ball and pick and roll. They're kind of freaked out by Tyler and Duncan. Remember, the Heat had just had their best 2-game shooting stretch in franchise history, back-to-back games, over 50% from 3, 30 attempts at least. So the Knicks were really kind of scattered and handoffs and pick and rolls, trying to make sure they get a hand in the face for Tyler and Duncan. Heat were running pick and rolls at Towns, or Karl-Anthony Towns, and Tyler especially was reading the game so well. Every time you felt that second guy coming up, pocket pass over the top, and it was dunks, it was layups, it was quick catches on the short roll for threes. At one point, the Knicks didn't close out or they didn't track back in transition after a missed shot, and Khalil had a wide open windmill in transition. That came in the second half, I believe. But the point was the Knicks weren't super sharp, and I think sometimes you hear that as a fan and think, well, you're making an excuse for the Knicks and you're trying to downplay what the Heat were doing, but that's not it. You have to be able to look at what the other side is doing, watch their defense, not just the Heat's offense, and think, is that defense operating, full functionality right now? Is that a fully operational space station? And the Knicks were not that in the first half. They were a step slow. Not only were they putting 2 on the ball and letting those easy over-the-top passes through, they weren't bringing help into the paint. And that's a hallmark of what the Tom Thibodeau has done with the Knicks, is always crowding the paint with Miami, bringing third men. Sometimes they'll strong side defense or overload the paint. Oftentimes they will just make sure that that third guy is ready to come over and catch the roller. None of that was happening in the first half. In the second half, all those defensive breakdowns started to dry up. Teams adjust. That's what they do. And again, this isn't a commentary speaking to why they didn't keep throwing the ball. And people had questions about that because he missed a shift. Basically, Spo went small in the second half. And it's not a commentary on Ware because he's a finisher of possessions right now. That's the best thing he does. And you can't just snap your fingers and recreate the same possessions as the defense is changing and adjusting. That's just, that's often the case, especially with centers. For years and years and years, that's been the case in the NBA. A lot easier to get them the ball early in games because if you're having success getting the centers the ball for dunks, defenses will do everything they can to stop that because nothing kills you like a dunk, right? So moving on to the second half, the Knicks start bringing that third man help much earlier. Even when those rolls were there, Bam or Ware, if there was going to be a catch, sometimes the Heat weren't even throwing those passes anymore because Fortunately, Tyler's making those reads. Duncan's making those reads. Okay, I got a pocket pass, but I can see that guy rotating over the paint. He's already right there. There's no reason for me to throw that ball because that could just get stolen right away, right? So in the first half, you have a lot of Karl-Anthony Towns on Bam. Then you start seeing some of OG Anunoby on Bam, and OG, is a defender we treat with a lot of respect. He's a top 5, 10, probably 5 defender in the NBA. So you have OG Anunoby on Bam oftentimes, which creates a switch opportunity. If Tyler keeps wanting to run his pick and rolls or handoffs with Bam, OG then gets the switch onto Tyler. Later in the game, sometimes OG was just on Tyler outright. That created some issues because that's New York's best defender on the guy Miami's running a lot of their offense through. And, in fairness, I think we also need to acknowledge that, part of the reason Spo said he didn't play Ware as much in the second half is because he thought with Miami up ahead by double digits, the main way the Knicks were going to get back in that game was by shooting threes. That's the way a lot of teams come back. And he wanted more speed on the floor to cover the three-point line. And in fairness, Khalil got scored on a couple times in the third quarter. Again, he's a rookie. He makes some, rookie mistakes as far as defensive rotations and such. So, if you watch that game again, it kind of makes sense why Ware didn't play. And obviously he also had an injury. He didn't play against Washington. But we're just, adding some context to why the rotation changed in the second half. And I want to give Ware a lot of credit, by the way. In these games, remember a couple games ago, he also didn't start the second half. Ware seems to have a lot of really good self-awareness, especially for a rookie. And he seems pretty bought in. There's no griping or grousing about his minutes or anything in postgame. He's very realistic about where he is, the fact that he's a rookie, the fact that he's still learning, still developing. He seems pretty bought in to what Spo is doing. So credit to him for having, just the right mindset, the right approach. I think that people notice that. Your teammates notice that, your coaches notice that. That matters going down the line. So, back to the second half, you got OG on Bam more second side help coming. The third man's coming over. You have Bam scoring on OG a little bit. Bam had one of his best jump shooting games of his career, really. But when he's trying to score on OG, he's mostly just going over the top. It's all jumpers. It's going to be hard to score face up on Anunoby. And you can keep going to that, but still, you don't want your entire shot diet to be 2-point jumpers, especially when you're trying to close the game in the clutch in the fourth quarter. You want to try and get, a more holistic, efficient offense, and then you can always go to that, and they did. And Bam got quite a few opportunities. Tyler didn't have a great shooting game. There were questions, from fans about his shot selection. Didn't really stand out to me that much because, the thing with Tyler is that he is the guy with the ball in his hands every single game. He is the A1A target for defenses. They're going to do everything they can to make it hard on him. That's why the Knicks were throwing long, lengthy defenders at Tyler, and they were throwing switches at him, second defenders, the whole kitchen sink, traps, everything. Tyler knows that too. Tyler knows what his role is for this team, what his responsibility, and he knows that the team needs him to create some shots. Maybe he rushed a shot or two against the Knicks, but, there was that one transition three he took, got a rebound coming up in overtime, pulled up from the top of the arc early in the clock. And to me, that kind of reminds me of the three, everybody remembers it, the Jimmy Butler three in Game 7 of the 2022 Eastern Conference Finals when they lost to Boston. There's a big question about shot selection there. Why don't you just drive him for the layup? Things like that. It's not always that easy once you do freeze frames and really slow down those possessions because there's defenders in the area. And if you got a pocket of space to shoot the pull-up three, that's a good shot for Tyler. We know Tyler can make that shot. But larger point is between that Butler shot from years ago, the Tyler shot, and some of the jumpers he was taking. He even dribbled in for that pull-up kind of right angle two. It's the same shot he made against Orlando for the game winner about a month plus ago. These are the shots that kind of make Tyler who he is. And when things are going well, nobody complains about shots like that. And we know he can make them. When he misses them in a tight game, there's consternation. But as far as shot selection, didn't really seem to me to be much of an issue. Those are shots that Miami needs Tyler to create. He is the lead shot creator on the floor, the lead playmaker. That's his job now. The team needs that from him. Now, all of this is to say, you can be encouraged by the offensive stretches, and you should be, that the team is having. They're having quarters and halves, ball moving, assists are piling up. It looks like great basketball, and especially in quarter and halves like the first one against New York, where it's coming from 2-point. 2-pointers have sometimes been Miami's weakness, over the years, because we know they can get their threes in most games. So when it's not just coming off, efficient 3-point shooting, when they're getting in the paint a ton, that's really encouraging from this group, because that's how they, figure out a way to build efficient offense that's sustainable, over the course of the season, over the course of multiple seasons. But, when it comes, side note here, because I know people are getting on Spo for some of the fourth quarter offensive issues, and I just want to pose a question to you. Have we considered the possibility that Spo is actually setting the team up really well offensively, and he's cutting out low-hanging fruit and squeezing a lot of juice out of the orange, so to speak, on the offensive end, and that's why they're having these really good first halves, these great offensive quarters? I think you have to consider that as well. It's easy to – we talked a couple games ago, if you don't like the rotation, that becomes an easy target. Coaches always become easy targets after, intense games like that, especially when the offense struggles a bit. But I think you also have to keep in mind that the offense is being set up really well, and the system is strong. The fundamentals are strong. Sometimes you just need players to evolve, especially in late-game situations where they are now the guys, Tyler and Bam, and the players around them. They're all figuring this out. New rotation, new players, new teammates. A lot of this is new. But while you can be encouraged by these first halves, like we were just saying, you can still understand that, defenses adjust. Defenses have a say in things. That's what the playoffs are going to look like. The playoffs are almost always going to look more like third and fourth quarters of regular season games than first and second quarters, especially fourth quarters. Clutch minutes tend to reflect, even though the data, the numbers in clutch minutes are so small that we don't want to read too much into them. Stylistically, pace-wise, those minutes tend to reflect what playoff games are like more. So that's why we got to talk about it. And what we learn now about the Heat is what can they hit back with offensively in these games where defenses are adjusting and tightening up. We've got a month plus to see what their late-game offense can become. We've seen what Wiggins, when he's healthy, can add as a third shot creator next to Tyler and Bam. We've seen the threes. We've seen the free throws. Let's see what it all can evolve into, because, their late-game offense, once we get into, like we said, it's going to be looking like play-in tournament, or they can jump up, maybe get into the playoff seed outright. Late-game offense is going to be a huge thing, and we've got a little while to see where it goes. What is there to say about the Wizards game? Not much. It was a professional win by Miami, never particularly dominant. The Wizards kind of closed it to 8 in the third quarter. Didn't really feel like much of a threat. Miami eventually pushed it to 20 down the stretch. Never was really in doubt. The Wizards, again, have the lowest net rating in the league. They had won a couple games of late. They've added some vets in Chris Middleton and Marcus Smart at the trade deadline, so there is a little bit more cohesion among their, what they're doing on both ends of the floor. But the Heat, anybody watching this game could see that the Heat were doing things at a higher level. They have that foundation that we talked about before, that even when they're missing players, they're going to be able to approach the game consistently in a certain way with a certain system, certain philosophy, all of that. And the Wizards, they do everything. They're a young team, but they're also a young team in that they're playing through their youth. They're starting their youth. They're starting Alex Sarr, Coulibaly, George, Bob Carrington. They're starting their youth, and they're playing through them and letting them explore their games, letting them develop, letting them make mistakes. That's the way you develop guys in this league. And still, those young guys, the youth, and they're bringing some more off the bench. The youth makes the mistakes you expect them to make. They turn the ball over, sometimes unforced turnovers. When they get themselves in the tight spots, they throw the ball away, and it leads to pick six stuff from Miami. They commit unnecessary fouls. They bite on pump fakes. They lose cutters off the ball. They make wild claims like they invented the question mark. Got you there. But they also play hard, and they flash talent regularly. Sometimes there's 5-cent finishes that follow up really nice $5 moves. That's just what you get with young guys. But, there's something there. They're definitely building towards something. You can kind of feel it coming. And teams going through honest rebuilds like that, they're worthy of your respect. I think it's easy to look at the team's record, easy to look at some of those youthful mistakes and kind of write them off. I don't think that's necessarily very fair, especially teams that are going about it, with the right approach, because no team is above the natural cycles of the NBA. Every team in the league at some point, sometimes it takes decades to get there, but everybody ends up, going through a rebuild at some point. And you don't want to be the team that, throws stones in a glass house when it comes to that kind of stuff. You respect the team and where they are in their natural cycle of building, what they want to be a contender. And you never know, because teams like that don't have a very good record now, they could be standing in your way, right in your way, a few years from now. Nobody was talking much about the Oklahoma City Thunder 4 years ago. Nobody was talking much about the Houston Rockets 2 years ago. Nobody was talking anything about the Detroit Pistons last year. And look at where the Pistons are now. They're right in Miami's way at number 6. So, give teams like that a little grace and a little respect, because they're building towards something and they're trying to do it the right way. Now, a couple of pieces of news. Bam Adebayo got his 222nd double-double to pass up Ronnie Cycli. We had a nice media visit with Cycli before the game. It's fun to kind of hear his perspective on the game and everything, and how the difference was. He wasn't curmudgeonly in the way some players are about the 90s. You kind of just acknowledge the differences in between the two different eras and how different his league was back then and what Bam's league is now. He said Bam would probably have been more like a power forward in the early 90s. He compared him he complimented him and compared him to Horace Grant as far as the winning impact he made. Horace Grant, by the way, I don't think a lot of people remember, was an all-star. So that was fun to have Cycli around. Bam, it was a career milestone for him. Obviously meant something to him. He came into the post-game press conference with UD on FaceTime, and UD was saying words that we can't repeat on this video. And there was also a career-high 16 points for Pelle Larsson. His best showing in some time. Pelle hadn't always been getting a ton of rotation minutes lately. It's been up and down, even though since training camp we had kind of known that you can see what Eric Spoelstra is going to like in Pelle, and he's gone to him a few times this year.